Hello, so in the last few videos we have created a document that looks something like this, and I think as an exam document this looks pretty good. You know, we've got a nice front page with the relevant details and also the questions are formatted nicely as well. Now the only thing missing, I think, if this is an exam document is that we need to give some students some extra space just in case they need it, and we usually give that in the form of extra answer pages at the end. Okay, and that may be, for example, if students need some space for rough working, or perhaps the space that we've allocated underneath the question is not enough. Perhaps they might make a mistake or something. Okay, they need some extra dotted lines at the end of the document. So we're going to do that by defining two different macros. The first macro is going to give us some dotted lines, one after the other. Okay, and it's actually going to build on the dotted line command that we've already created in another video. So let's first of all come into our preamble. And underneath where we've defined our header and footer, before it says begin document, let's put some extra lines in here. And let's actually comment this to good practice so that we know if we come back later, this is what we're doing. So this will be extra answer pages. Okay, cool. Now, like I say, the first macro that we need to define is the number of dotted lines that we need. Okay, so let's first of all start by defining a new macro, so new command. And remember, it needs two sets of inputs, so two sets of curly brackets. Let's first of all give our name to this macro. Let's call it notes, so /notes. And before we define what our macro is actually doing, in between these two sets of curly brackets, put two sets of square brackets. Now, the first set of square brackets is the number of inputs which LaTeX is expecting from the user. So in this case, we need 3 inputs, okay? Now, don't worry about what we need to put in the second set of square brackets because we're going to put /empty, okay? So don't worry about why that's happening. Just trust me, we need that. Now, I'm going to put a percentage in where I'm defining my my macro. So in the second set of curly brackets, I'm going to put a percentage and then a new couple of different lines just to make it easier to follow what we're doing. And I'm actually going to tab here as well just to make it easier to format. Now, what we want to do is we want to take from the user the number of dotted lines which they want, okay? So for example, if they want 5 dotted lines, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to actually define each line separately. So we're going to get LaTeX to do the first line, then it's going to do the second line, then the third line, then the fourth line. It's going to carry on going until the 5th line, or however many inputs or however many lines the user wants, okay? And we're going to do that using a for loop. Now, if you're not familiar with for loops, it doesn't matter. You can just follow my code and it would work, okay? If you are, then I'll try and kind of talk you through what we're doing at the same time. So we go / for each, okay? And then I'm going to define the variable that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to go /n, so n is my variable. Then make sure you put a space. I'm going to type in, and I'm going to actually put the set of values which this variable is going to iterate over. So obviously, I want LaTeX to do the first line, then the second line, then the third line, then the fourth line, then the 5th line, however many lines the user defines, okay? So the way to do that is to start at 1, then I'm going to put comma, ... another comma, and then going to use the second input which the user gives me. So I'm going to put #2. And that'll basically start at line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, right the way through to however many lines the user asked me for. Okay, now I'm actually in a position where I can define what this for loop is going to be doing. So I put another set of curly brackets, again percentage, a couple of new lines to make it easier to follow, and perhaps tab as well. Now, I'm going to use something called an if statement. If you're familiar with if statements, they're very, very easy, okay? All it basically means is it says, if something is true, do this. Otherwise, if that thing isn't true, do this, okay? Now, because we're using Overleaf, we don't actually need to install any other packages for this, okay? If you're using a different LaTeX compiler, TeXworks, TeXmaker, things like that, you might need to install the package if then, okay? But I'm not, I'm using LaTeX, so you can just follow along with what I'm doing. So /, and I'm going to put if, then, else, all as one word, okay? Now, the way which this works, it basically accepts 3 inputs. So I'm going to put these 3 inputs in 3 curly brackets. And in fact, I might put each set of curly brackets on a new line, okay? How this actually works, in the first set of curly brackets, that's the statement that I want to check is true. So I basically say to LaTeX, if this statement is true, then do whatever is in the second set of curly brackets. Otherwise, if that thing in the first set of curly brackets is not true, then do the thing in the third set of curly brackets. So that's how it works, okay? So if the thing in the first set of curly brackets is true, then do the thing in the second set of curly brackets. Otherwise, if it's not true, then do the thing in the third set of curly brackets. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to check whether we are up to the number of lines which the user has defined. Because if we're not, then I need to put space underneath those dotted lines, okay? So all I need to do is come into my first set of curly brackets, and the statement that I'm going to check is true is if we are equal to the number of lines which the user has defined. So I'm going to go backslash equal, and then in curly brackets, I'm going to put input number 1. Okay, so if we're equal to the number of lines which the user has defined, okay? And then after those curly brackets, I'm just going to backslash empty. Okay, so that there is what my first statement is, okay? So if we're up to the number of lines which the user has defined, well, if we're up to the number of lines which the user has defined, we don't need to put space underneath, okay? So I'm just going to go backslash dot line, okay? And remember, dot line, it's the same dotted line that we defined as before. And first of all, we need to put a set of square brackets, and this is the thickness of the line. So I think 2 pints is absolutely fine. Then after that, I need to put another set of curly brackets, and this is the length of the line. Now, because I'm doing this dynamically, I'm actually just going to use input number 3 to define the length of the line. So whatever the third input from the user is, that's going to be the length of the line, so how wide that line is, okay? And actually I need to put a new line after this, okay? So I'm just going to use the shortcut 2 backslashes, okay? So basically, if we're up to the number of lines which the user has defined, then just put a dotted line and don't worry about putting space underneath. But obviously, if we're not up to the number of lines which the user has defined, then I need to put space underneath after my dotted line. So I'll put dot line, and again, in square brackets, I'll still put 2 points. And I'm still going to use input number 3 to define the length of the line, but this time I'm going to put V space, and I think in this case I'm going to use the V space of input number 1. Okay, so in other words, if we're up to the number, so whatever input number 1 is, okay, then we're going to put V space of that amount. And again, I'm going to use 2 new lines, or 2 backslashes to indicate a new line there. And that's it, okay? So that will basically give me notes one after the other, okay? And in fact, I could probably show that in action by just putting it underneath here. So if I just use the notes command underneath one of my questions, so for example, this one here, okay? I'm just going to use the notes command, so I'll go notes, okay? And remember that notes requires 3 inputs. The first input is how wide or how much space I want in between each line. So in this case, I'm just going to use 10 pints of space in between each line. Second input, which I put in curly brackets, is the number of lines, okay? So in this case, let's just say I want 3 dotted lines one after the other, okay? And then the last input, which I'm going to put in curly brackets, is how wide I want each line, so how wide I want each line. So in this case, I want it to actually be the same as the text width, okay? So now if I recompile this, you should see that underneath this question, I will end up with 3 dotted lines. Like so, okay? And obviously that didn't quite work because I need to define a new line after that question. But now if I do it again, then effectively there'll be 3 lines after each question, okay? By the way, you notice that these 3 dotted lines, okay, these 3 dotted lines are kind of over and matching the margin of this, okay? So matching the margin of the question. In order to get around that, all I can do is just go backslash and I can just go full width, okay? And then that will basically get me out of this kind of sub-list environment, which is what that question is basically doing. Then I'll move everything over towards the left. Okay, like so. So that's now nicely formatted and looking nice. Anyway, we're not quite done yet, because if you remember, what I want to do for the extra pages is actually have that on a new page. Okay, so I want all the dotted lines on one page, then perhaps I want another page of dotted lines, then I perhaps want another page of dotted lines. Okay, so I actually need to define another macro. So if I come back up here, I now need to define a macro which gives me this on however many pages I define. So let's define a new macro, so new command, and again, 2 inputs. The first is what I'm going to call my macro, so I'm going to call it extra answer page, okay? Actually, I'm going to put a set of square brackets in between these 2 sets of curly brackets, and this is going to be the number of inputs. So I just want 1 input here, and this is just simply how many answer pages I want, okay? Now I'm in a position where I can actually define what my macro is doing. So again, percentage and a couple of new lines in between. And I'm going to use a very similar thing to what I did before. I'm going to use a for loop, okay? So I'm going to go for each, okay? And again, I'm going to use \n, space in, and make sure you put in curly brackets. And then it's going to 1, comma, ... right the way up to whatever input I define. So effectively, this is going to carry on for however many pages I want. So if I want 3 pages, it's going to do this for the first page, then again for the second page, then for the third page. Okay, now I'm actually in a position where I can define what my for loop is doing. So I put another set of curly brackets, percentage, then perhaps another couple of new lines, and perhaps I'll tab this out as well to make it easier to follow. Okay, well, first things first, I want to make sure I define a new page, okay? Because I don't want my dotted lines carrying on from my previous page. So I definitely want a new page. Okay, I think it would also be nice if we had at the top of each page a box which tells students that this is actually an answer, this is actually an additional page where they can put working if they wish. So I'm going to first of all put this in the center of the page, okay? And I'm going to put this in a T color box. So I'm going to go T color box, okay? And make sure you end the T color box as well. Now the parameters I'm going to use are going to be enhanced. They're going to be the background color, which is going to be white, and the frame color, so cold frame, which is going to be black. Okay, cool. So now I'm actually in a position where we can define our T color box. So I'm going to put this in a set of curly brackets. This is what's going to go inside my T color box, okay? Now, actually, I might just put that on a couple of new lines just for the sake of the moment, then I'll get rid of this in just a second. So first things first, I want to put a title at the top. So I'm going to begin and end center. So I want it to be in the middle of my T color box, like so. Okay. And what do I want? Well, first of all, I want this to be a large font. Okay. And in bold, I want to tell students that this is an additional answer page. Okay. Then outside that, so not in bold, but still centered, I want to tell students to clearly number each question. Okay. And actually, I'm just going to put all that, just for the sake of space, I'm going to put all of that on the same line. So I'm not going to put any line breaks in between. It doesn't matter, but I'm not going to put any line breaks in between to make it easier to follow. Okay, so that's my T color box. That's what's going to appear at the top of the page. Then I can actually use my notes document. Okay, so I can use my notes macro, which I've defined before. So first things first, I'm going to put \no indent. This is just because, as a convention, whenever I put a new line, LaTeX will occasionally actually indent that for me. So actually put little indent automatically. I don't want that, so I'll put no indent. Now I can put my notes macro, okay? So this is just going to basically give me dotted lines one after the other, like I've got here, for however many I like. So remember, my first input is in square brackets. This is the spacing in between each line. I think 10 pints of space. I think that is absolutely fine. Same as what I've got going on there. The second input is how many lines I actually want. Now I've found that for this particular document setup, 25 works well. But if you've defined your document setup slightly different, then just use a different number. But I think 25 works fine for this document. Then the third input, which I put in curly brackets, is how wide I want the lines to be. So in this case, I want it to last the text width. Okay, so now this is it. So I'm in a position now, if I come down, let's say I come down to underneath where I finished off my questions, because I have finished off my questions now, and I just type my command, my macro, extra answer page. And remember, it's only one input, and it's however many extra answer pages I want with these dotted lines on. And let's say I want 2 extra pages with the dotted lines. Okay, so now if I click recompile, you will see that at the end of the document, there'll be 2 extra pages, and they'll just be filled with dotted lines. And at the top of each page, I've got additional answer page, clearly answer each question, then a page of dotted lines, and then the same thing again. And I can keep on changing this. So if I now change this to 3 additional answer pages, then it'll be the same thing, but this time with 3 additional answer pages there. Okay. Now, the only thing to really point out here is you notice that our footer, so at the moment, it's got 4 of 3. The reason being is because where we put our last page label. Okay, so our last page label by default, or where we put it in the last videos, we've put it underneath where we finished off our questions. So a simple way of changing that is just simply to come underneath here where it says extra answer page and put it underneath there. Okay, and so then that way, this will be 4 of, well, in this case, 6. Okay, like so. So that's just a quick change there. But that's how to get some additional answer pages at the end of your document.